I am co-founder and chief exec at Timewise, and together with Claire Campbell, our program director, we are going to be taking you through this webinar for the next hour. So the topic is From Crisis to Opportunity, Redesigning the Workplace. And our aim is to share with you some of the insights that we've developed over the many years of thinking about flexible working here at Timewise, and some thoughts and considerations as to how you can explore ways of extending flexible working as we come out of the other side, hopefully, of this current pandemic crisis that we are in. I guess it's fair to say, for those of you who are joining us, you will know from your organisations that COVID-19 has shone a light on flexible working as never before, but it's also fair to say that what we are seeing currently, or have been seeing, is a very rapid response under pressure and at pace, remote working experiment. Many of you will have established new ways of working remotely, but most of you, and I'm sure that's why you're here today, will now be thinking, how do we bridge the gap between what we've done and what we may want to think about going forward, which is hopefully a more systemic and a more inclusive approach to flexible working. And what we want to do today is to try and help you think about some of the things that you might want to put in place to help you to bridge that gap, so that, as we said, you can respond to and hopefully evolve the ways that you're working in the future for your organisations. So in terms of today, Claire, do you want to, we're going to do a bit of a double act. We will be talking to you for probably about sort of 30 minutes or so, maybe 40 minutes, and then there will be an opportunity for Q&A. So as I said, the purpose of today is very much to see how we can both help you to consider some of the potential pitfalls, but also opportunities, and be mindful to those when you're thinking about evolving your approach to flexible working, and also to give you some very, very practical guidance for you to explore how you need to have conversations internally, whether it's with your business leaders, whether it's with your teams, or whether it's with the managers that you support, so that you can start to put the building blocks in place going forward. We will be, for all of you at the end of this session, sharing 2 guides that we have produced as part of this programme. The first is a guide for managers on navigating those conversations about flexible working and managing flexible teams. And the second is a guide for your employees that we hope you'll be able to share and that they will get value from. So those will be available at the end of the session. And I should say that this programme of support is one of a number of webinars that we have been running here at Timewise for the last 6 weeks, really, for organisations of all shapes and sizes, with lots of strategic partners, to provide some very practical guidance based on what we know about flexible working. A little bit, first of all, on housekeeping. So I'm sure you are all very used to and familiar with Zoom, and you will have all muted yourself, so thank you very much at the start of this session. We do have a chat function, so if you have questions, thoughts, comments that you want to raise, then please do use the chat function and put those questions in for us. We are at some point going to do a very short poll, and we'll be popping that up on your screen, so we would be really grateful if you could complete that for us. And obviously, if there's any issues or queries that you have from a technical perspective as we go, please also, as I said, use the chat function. So before we kick off, a little bit about Timewise, for those of you who don't know us. So we are a social business. We have been around for about 15 years, and our mission is to ensure that everybody gets the flexibility they need in the workplace without compromising their careers. As you can imagine, this is both a fascinating, challenging and very busy time for us at the moment at Timewise. So we do 3 things to deliver on that mission. The first is we undertake a lot of research and awareness raising and campaign work to promote both the social and the business benefits of flexible working. So we run an annual index tracking the state of job vacancies and how many are open to flex at the point of hire. And we also run our Power 50 annual awards, championing those people who've managed to progress into very senior roles whilst working part-time, which is the hardest, obviously, bit of flexible working to crack. The second thing we do is we go into businesses of all shapes and sizes, and we give them practical support to improve their approach to flexible working. And that ranges from sector-based change programs in industries such as education, construction, retail, the NHS, right through to bespoke pieces of work that we do for many of the UK's leading FTSE 250 companies. So we help organisations to develop visions in terms of what do they want their mission and their vision to articulate in the context of flexible working. We train managers to manage flexible teams, and we run bespoke programmes looking at how to redesign jobs to be more flexible. And then the last thing that we do is we also run our own job site. So for us and for many of our regular clients, it's really important that if you are open to flexibility, that you are open to that for candidates. And as part of your employer brand position, you're able to say so as much as you are for your employees. And so we represent about 90,000 candidates who are all looking for their next job to be a flexible one. And many of our clients, as I said, advertise their organisations and their roles on our site to promote the fact that they are open to flexibility from day one. So that's just a bit about us. I guess a bit of scene setting before we get into the practicalities. So it goes without saying, and I'm sure you all know, that's why you're here, that we all know there are some real benefits in business benefits in embracing flexible working. So clearly from an employee perspective, we know flexible working can help individuals to manage work-life balance, it can help with well-being, it can help managing work and care, but we recognise at the moment, and the reason we exist is there are still structural inequalities for people who need to work flexibly or who need to work in a non-9-to-5 way, both in terms of being able to access decent quality jobs and also have the job mobility they need to progress up and around the jobs market. But the business benefits are really clear. We know that businesses that we work with, and many businesses who embrace flexible working, are able to attract talent, they're able to retain it, they're able to maximise performance. These won't be new stats to you. What we will say is what COVID has also done is highlight how many people in the UK are currently looking to retain some form of flexibility. So from a talent, employee engagement, well-being perspective, if you are thinking about your workforce right now, you will know that every survey or every report you read is highlighting people want to keep some form of flexibility. A recent survey suggested that actually approximately 13 million people are going to be looking to retain some form of flexibility going forward. So we know that businesses are going to need to respond to this and explore really carefully how they do that, as well as clearly thinking about ways that they may well be able to both maintain performance and efficiency and also think about cost savings when it comes to real estate. So we were just having a conversation before this session about a number of firms, that we know leases are up, and when leases are up, this is an opportunity to also explore how people can work differently. But it's about understanding what the parameters are around those different forms of flexibility. So for all kinds of reasons, it's going to be really important to not just be thinking about your return, but thinking about the longer term approach you want to take to flexible working as we come out of this crisis. We often hear the term, don't fear the floodgates. If you say yes to one person who works flexibly, you'll have to say yes to 10. We're past that. We can no longer fear the floodgates of flexible working. Forward-thinking businesses, forward-thinking leaders are now working out right now how to respond to the demand that they are seeing in the market from their workforce to be able to continue to work flexibly. And they should, because what we know is that more and more businesses are recognising that through this crisis, there has been assumption that we would all lose some form of productivity, we would all lose some form of performance and engagement. Actually, the statistics and the research that's coming through is suggesting that is not the case. So in terms of thinking more broadly about ways of being able to work flexibly, that's my daughter. She's come in to help me have a coffee. I'm working very flexibly from home. And to help us balance our work and our life as parents, if I go to the next slide, we are seeing both firms and managers talking about this on a regular basis. So depending on which piece of research you look at, we estimate probably around about 3/4 of the workforce are wanting to retain some form of flex. And we're also recognising that a number of senior managers, leaders, organisations that have been consulted are recognising that actually this is working. Obviously, COVID and the response that we have had to make is not working consistently for everybody. But what they're seeing is pleasantly surprising, that there are different ways of enabling flexibility for different populations, and we need to capture the positives from those and to be able to retain those. I'm just going to pause. We'd really like to understand from you all who are on this webinar, your perspectives in terms of what your organisations are doing or what you are thinking about in terms of working flexibly going forward. Claire's going to put a poll up, and it's literally just take a couple of seconds. While you're with us, it'd be really helpful. Could we ask you to complete the poll? So we've just got 3 real questions for you. Firstly, to understand if prior to COVID you did work flexibly or not, and what kind of flex. Secondly, whether you want to work more flexibly even after social distancing reduces. And then thirdly, whether your organisation is already exploring and discussing how you can enable flexible working in the long term. So if you could just take a couple of ticks to complete that, I'd be really grateful. Thank you. Okay.
I know there's 1 or 2 people who phoned in, so they may not be able to see the poll. Otherwise, it looks like, yeah, 90% of people have given us some answers there. Okay, so I'll end it and you can have a look at the results.
Gosh. So 100% of you want to work more flexibly going forward. So we are talking to the right audience. That's fascinating. So 60% of you 100% now, and 97% have said that you're already having these conversations, which is, I guess, why you're here. So so that's good to know. Only 3% are not. Okay, we've been running these sessions, as I said, for the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks. It's been really interesting tracking this. We haven't polled everybody all the time, but about 4 weeks ago, people wanted to, the conversations weren't happening. Now all the conversations are happening. So I think your feedback to us is certainly resonates with what we're seeing in the market right now. Thank you. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on some of the kind of potential pitfalls and opportunities before I hand over to Claire, who's going to take you through some of the kind of practical steps that you might want to think about. So in terms of potential pitfalls, clearly, whilst flexible working can be a positive for many, as with any adjustments to ways of working, we also recognise that the current situation is not always working the same for everybody. We are hearing, seeing, understanding in the market that, you know, many firms are trying their best to make this work, but there are some pitfalls to be aware of. And there's some significant challenges with the current way of working that we know and we hope is only going to be localised in the context of working under a pandemic, which is extreme circumstances, and that we need to make sure we don't extend clearly in terms of how we build a more inclusive approach to flex going forward. So the first thing to say, as you'll all be very, very aware, is, you know, we are living in a kind of 24/7 working environment at the moment. Everybody is clearly expected to be always on, and we recognise that that is particularly compounded for people in your organisation who also will have a whole array of responsibilities at home that they may not necessarily have had when it comes to homeschooling or caring for family members. The challenges, you know, your population, your employees will be clearly concerned about job security. We all know that. The role, we would say, of the manager is really key here. So whilst you are having these conversations about how to move from what you have now to a gradual return to a sort of post-pandemic working environment, it's going to be really critical that your managers are regularly talking to your teams and trying to make sure that those conversations enable people to feel it's okay to take time off. So we hear lots of anecdotal stories about people being given permission to sort of log holiday, to log toil, to log time that they need to take, or that are told they can request it. The responses are often quite low because there is still a pervasive, often assumption, unless you communicate, that if you are seen to be taking time off, you may be seen to be penalised in some way going forward. So it's really, really important that your managers have these regular conversations. Secondly, we also know, and again you would have seen from a gender perspective, there are some considerable Watch out at the moment. This is the first year we haven't done gender pay gap reporting since it started. We know that more women are taking on more at home, even in dual income households. So depending on the research that you look at, 6 hours versus 4 hours for men in dual income households on average a week. Some studies are suggesting it's actually double the amount of work at home as well as in the workplace. Clearly this is challenging and is not how we all want our lives to be. Again, what can you as organisations do? What you can do is to make sure that when you start to have conversations about different ways of working, or when you currently are, encourage your male staff to take some time out. Make sure that you don't make assumptions about who is having to adjust their working hours because they may have to be taking up more at home. Make sure those conversations are as equal as they possibly can be. And then the third area clearly to watch out for is the prolonged impact we know on people who are working for you who will be vulnerable either because they're shielding, because they will be older, or because they will be in a high-risk health group. And again, it's going to be really, really important to ensure going forward that the working practices continue to be inclusive, that however you manage that return, it may be you have some people who are staying working from home on a regular basis, and you will have some who will do a phased return back to the office, that you think about how meetings need to happen, that you think about technology. And one of our clients recently said, we have probably about 30% of our workforce starting to come back. Even the ones in the office will be doing Zoom calls because we want to make sure that everybody feels the same. There's some really interesting psychology around remote working. If you feel that you are the exception to the rule, clearly you are now no longer the exception, you are the norm. But if you do feel that you are the one person that is having to opt in when everybody else is in an office, then it can significantly affect your ability to engage and input into meetings and into workload. So just a few watch outs. But clearly, and the reason we're doing this session is there are also some significant opportunities to consider in relation to how you think about the return to work, the return to post-pandemic working environment, and what we can retain. In terms of what we're seeing and hearing, Claire, can I have the next slide? Mm-hmm. We know historically that one of the biggest areas of resistance around managers in particular engaging in flexible working and enabling their teams to work flexibly is one of trust. We know, we hear stories all the time about if I can't see you, I don't know that you're working, issues around presenteeism. First thing to say is that just because everyone is working from home, that doesn't mean to say we don't have presenteeism. We can have it in many different ways, and it can come across in many different sort of manners and unspoken ways. So in terms of thinking about the opportunities for ways of working going forward, we need to be aware and consider this issue of trust. And the thing that's been really interesting to see in terms of what's coming out and what we're hearing from our clients and we're reading and we're recognising from the research is that many managers are starting to recognise, in fact there's a survey recently, 3/4 have said they have been pleasantly surprised by the level of commitment, the level of trust, and the level of productivity that they are seeing from their teams, even during a crisis like this. Now that, for a start, is quite phenomenal. But I hope that what that suggests is you can use that information to feed back to your teams and to feed back to those who may well have had some anxieties, because a lot of the reason we don't often have flexible working in teams is because there is a perception this can't work. We are past perception, we are into reality mode now. People are carrying on working, they are being productive, and they are finding ways to communicate. The challenge now is how do we hold on to that? And in terms of thinking about resetting working practices, there are also things to think about in terms of different ways of working. So obviously remote working is just one form of flexible working. We can also think about how we adjust our hours and the outputs that we have, whether it's thinking part-time, but also firms are going to have to start to think about how people can change the times that they work. So whether it's adjusting for having to travel into the office, start and finish times, or whether it's actually thinking about doing work that fits around the things that you have at home that also enables you to be as productive as you possibly can. So we've got a major opportunity, and it's at scale, and that is quite, can be quite challenging, but we have a major opportunity to hold on to some of the things we're learning. Just one anecdote, we recently was speaking to a number of major construction firms, and my favourite story of the week is that one of their teams who monitors the track on the railways, he usually works very, very late at night because he can't be there obviously when the trains are running. It's a very dangerous job. Health and safety is paramount, and they have to check the tracks are safe. He's been doing it from home with a drone. He's able to do it as and when he needs to. He works around the train schedule, and actually what he'd noticed was that the level of accuracy in this way of working had really risen. So there's some really innovative work that's happening in roles, even in frontline industries, that we wouldn't expect. He still needs to do his job. He needs to look after the drone, he needs to monitor it, but he's doing the analysis as opposed to having to be up there in the middle of the night. So I'd ask you just to think about some of those examples in your organisations where you may have found people working in very, very different ways, and try and learn and understand, okay, how can we maintain that? And what are the things that they're doing differently that are enabling that role to be effective? The last thing I just want to touch on, I guess, is when we talk about the gap, what we mean by the gap between being in a rapid response, remote working way to a more systemic and a more inclusive approach to flexible working. And I just wanted to show you this slide because at Timewise, we use this all the time with all of the work that we do. It's what we call our flexibility maturity curve. And for us, and for those that we work with, it's really helpful to try and make a distinction between what we would call rapid response and sort of, request response approach to flexible working, and a more proactive approach. So a request response model is where you probably have, prior to COVID, had an approach where people can work flexibly, but only if they ask. So the assumption would be very much, we work in this way, if you want to work differently, you ask us. Moving into a proactive approach is very much where you as an organisation will have a real clear vision, and you will clarify for your teams exactly what you are open to when it comes to flex, whether it's working remotely, whether it's a blended offer, whether it's you're open to part-time. And you'll do that through all your systems and processes, so not just when people ask, but at regular reviews, and you'll do it through your recruitment processes as well. So at this stage, we would just ask you to start thinking about, I guess, some of the kind of differences and some of the questions that you might want to ask your managers and your leaders to try and assess where you are on this curve. So are you simply, through this crisis, replicating what you do in the office at home? Are you keeping the same hours, the same structure? Have you found instead maybe different ways of being able to enable people to work? Are you just assuming that people are going to get on with their jobs and do what they can? Or are you regularly checking in and readjusting outputs and expectations? Are you thinking this is a short-term sprint and you will go back? Or are you thinking about this in a more systemic, long-term way? We'd encourage you to start asking those questions to your leadership teams. Where do you want to be in terms of security, in terms of flexibility? Where do you want to be in terms of how good you are at flexible working going forward? And those are the kind of considerations that we ask your leaders to start thinking about now, so that you can start to make those plans, not just for the next 2 months, but the next 6 months and the next 12 months, because it will take time to make that adjustment. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Claire, who is going to talk to you about some of the very practical considerations in terms of thinking about different ways of working flexibly and what you might want to do now. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. So yes, what I want to do is kind of introduce some of the tools and things that we will be sharing with you after this call that we think will help you through the next few months as you transition. Well, firstly, we make the best of this extended remote working period and learn some of the right skills to support people through that, and then return to work, but in a world where everybody has greater access to flexible working. So, start with there are 3 key groups, I think, in terms of this conversation, plus the staff. I'm not ignoring those, but I think in terms of driving the agenda, the key players in that will be your leadership team, your HR team, and line managers themselves. So firstly, your leadership community, quite, just key to this at the moment. And I think we've really seen that leaders are more visible than ever. They're in people's homes talking on their computer in their lounge or their study. So leadership has become more visible. People report feeling closer to them because of that kind of greater accessibility, all the video calls and so on. But that makes them even more visible role models to how they've worked through this situation, and then what they expect the vision to be for the future. So leaders are one key audience. Managers, I think we're starting to see now, this has been a prolonged period, that managers are finding it harder to work out how they can engage and can really connect to their teams over this extended period of time. And their duty of care role right now is so important. We know there are employees out there suffering with anxiety or stress, living through strange situations. And to the manager role in being able to pick up and have those conversations, which is not always one managers find easy, is something that's really important, and that we've given you a few tools to help facilitate. And thirdly, HR, I think, in aligning messages, key processes, and I know HR's had just a mammoth task the last few weeks in rapidly adapting and changing working practices and policies and facilitating that. But I think the task goes on for us in the weeks ahead as we look at how this changes the way we do performance management, the way we do recruitment, the way we do talent management, and particularly the D&I agenda around inclusivity right now is absolutely critical to make sure we're not making particular groups feel excluded as we return to the office. And that's excluded because some people are at home, some people are in the office. It could also be excluded because some people are getting greater access to flexible working opportunities than others. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. So leadership shadow, let's talk first about that role of leaders. I think, it's been really key through this period to have the right rhetoric and role model from leadership teams, because, and I think, now we're 4 months in, that's showing in the organisations who still have the commitment of their team to go over and above during this time, and others where it's waning and people are reporting they're just feeling, they've kind of lost touch and they're not feeling connected to their organisations anymore. And we've all seen stories in the press of leaders who've got it right through this in terms of how they're supporting their staff and their customers and through their services and products, supporting people through COVID, versus others who are making it difficult, the Wetherspoons and Sports Directs of the world, who seem to be making it as hard as they can for their staff to manage through. So HR's role, I think, sometimes it's playing that mirror and coach roles to our leadership teams at this time, talking about how they're feeling, encouraging them to be human, to talk to staff about how they're feeling, how they're finding it challenging, how they're adapting their ways of working. And then to start, many of you said you're talking now about what return to the office or flexible working in the long term looks like. So start thinking, get your leadership team engaging people in that conversation, help shape a future that's more than just about real estate savings, which I know might be a driver, but let's make sure this, we talk about flexible working in the broadest sense. So I'm sharing here, some of you may have seen this, but I really liked these principles around working through this crisis shared by a director at Elsevier, which really make the point that this is not the time to be gunning for the highest productivity and achievement you can manage. This is a time to be kind. This is a time to prioritize yourself and accept that we're working through a crisis and it's less than ideal, and you will not be judged in the same way that you are. And I think many people needed to hear this kind of message in the past few weeks. So that's a little bit on leadership. As I said, really key, and will ensure that whatever you do by way of a vision for the future and ways of working will kind of sink or swim dependent on your leaders, not just saying it, but doing it and role modeling it themselves. We'll move on then to the role of managers. And I think, we've used this model in the past to explain where flexibility works and where flexibility doesn't work. So finding a flexible framework very often at a team level that will work depends on matching both the organisation's needs in terms of what needs to be delivered with the individual's needs. And during the current time, those individual needs could be things like care and responsibilities people have to fit in during the day, managing around health concerns, mental or physical health issues, and just headspace for those, myself included, who are managing, home teaching alongside work. It's a very packed day, and we, as you're doing that 3 or 4 months in, people need to make sure they've got headspace in their week to kind of decompress and some time out, because I'm hearing so many stories of people starting work at 5 a.m. and working through till lunchtime, then handing over to their partner who works till 8 o'clock at night, and it's just that's really testing people's resilience over this extended period now. So, you know, within that broad framework that we encourage teams and managers to talk about their work, their needs, and how you can bring the two together. Starting point, I think, is to, you know, make sure people understand their purpose right now. The virus has had such a broad-ranging impact. You know, people's objectives need to be really fundamentally revisited and thought about in the context of what matters to the team and the organisation now, and I guess the time people have available to put in. So, you know, have your managers all revisited people's objectives? Are they clear, and are people clear on their priorities right now? Because another thing that will keep people feeling engaged and motivated is being really clear on how their work contributes to the organisation and kind of contributes to the broader aims of getting, you know, their organisation, their customers and their stakeholders kind of through this period. So, you know, people need a why right now. So a really good starting point for this is making sure the objectives have been, feel current, feel live. And then, you know, the beyond that, it's about finding a flexible working framework during COVID and beyond COVID that works, as I said, with those two circles, where it works for individuals, works for the organisation. So this is about managers understanding the whole kind of framework, and you making that clear for people what framework of flexible working options you have, so that, you know, everyone's been focused very much obviously on the where people work at the moment and remote working, which, you know, for now is home working, but in the medium to longer term could be local hubs, local cafes, partner organisations, other sites within your organisation. So how much what we've learned through this period, what's ideal in terms of the blend of remote and home working. We know a vast majority of people, when asked, want a blend of the two, want to be in an office a couple of days a week to have that connection to their colleagues, but at home a couple of days a week to, you know, reduce commuting time, have some thinking space. So, you know, it may be that sort of blend that many of you are working towards in the future. The when people work aspect is flexibility around working hours. And I think, again, this one's probably had less focus in the press, but has been a really fundamental shift in how we've worked in recent weeks. Very much, you know, people are breaking their days up. They're not just sitting at a desk 9 to 5 if they've got other things that they want to do within their life. We're all learning about when we work best and how we work best, and people are working their hours quite flexibly, particularly those with caring responsibilities. So, you know, how much of that kind of flexibility can you accommodate in the longer term? How important is it that people are available 9 to 5? Unless you're customer facing, it may not actually matter that much. So can you shift to focus much more on output and outcomes someone's delivering, and just work out which bits of the role are time critical and which bits people can have flexibility around, and that gives them that greater control. And it's been interesting. I've had a couple of clients recently talk about people who were part-time going back to full-time during this period, because actually once they've got that flexibility they need in terms of working from home and being able to flex their time during the week, they didn't need the part-time, you know, that Friday off, because actually they felt they had that control over their working week through the flexibility they've been granted through this period. So I think that's interesting, and again kind of links to focusing much more on outputs and outcomes that someone's delivering rather than their hours of work. And the last aspect, which is important in terms of understanding how to design jobs well, is the how much element. So where somebody wants to reduce their hours and work part-time or job share or so on. And I think, you know, during this time, people may be asking to reduce their hours because of caring responsibilities and commitments, or they could, and actually, you know, a lot of firms have been asking people to reduce their hours to help reduce salary costs and achieve savings there. And I think, you know, just key is to make sure you're designing those jobs fairly. If you're reducing people's salary, then their objectives need to be reduced by the same proportion. So that is being quite explicit on what adaptations and changes you've made to reduce someone's time. So, you know, this framework, I think this is about finding the flexibility that will work for somebody and work for the organisation. It's also about having a flexible working options for everybody. I mentioned earlier one of the fears that we've heard from firms at the moment is this is all very well for all our staff who've been able to remote work through this period, but we have frontline staff who can't remote work. So how do we not make it feel like a two-tier where we've got people who are now going to be working from home a lot of the time, and those who will always be in the frontline role. How do we make sure that this doesn't exclude those people and make it feel like a two-tiered system? And our answer, as evidenced in some of our work in retail and nursing and construction, is to look at team-based approaches and any options which really give people greater say in the when they're working or how much they're working, to give them a feeling that that they have control and choice over their work as much as other people who may have different options. So as I said, we've provided a bit of a framework for these conversations in a guide which we'll be sharing with you after this call. So one of the tools in there that I'm signposting here is actually, what key questions should you be asking your team right now? How do you talk to them about well-being? How do you talk to them about performance expectations? Are you checking that they've got the tools and the tech and the understanding of those tools to do a really good job right now? So nice simple framework for having good one-to-ones, both now and kind of repeatedly through this period as people's working patterns and needs continue to change. And because we believe teams, as I touched on with that point about frontline industries, because we believe teams are so important, we've also put within the guide a framework for team conversations about flexible working. Because when you start to look at work across teams, that's really where you can look for greater opportunities for flexible working. Because, partly because the team can cover each other and support each other and substitute for each other, and partly because they start to respect and understand each other's preferences, ways of working, outside life commitments, and then, usually will do their best to accommodate those. So the picture there, we did some work with Tesco's and we got managers, the assistant managers and the store managers, to talk and develop their rosters together. And it had a huge impact in terms of how they felt about work-life balance and so on, from quite simple things like learning that one manager was desperate to take his son to football training on a Sunday morning. So if they could make that happen in the way that they rostered their timetable, that meant a huge amount to him. And they were so respectful of each other's preferences and needs, and worked together as a team to make it work. So planning for the longer term, as many of you said, you've already starting these conversations, and I'm sure you've thought of this, but we really recommend you understand what that looks like and what your staff want that to look like. Because we've seen some surveys where there's going to be a huge upsurge in requests for part-time, and others where that's not the case, or people saying they want to entirely work remotely, others wanting a blend. So talk to staff, help them shape what that looks like, and will matter to them, because it does seem to be a bit varied depending on who I speak to. Secondly, look at your services, because this is about finding that win-win for what's going to work for the organisation and individuals. Involves looking at services or teams and understanding what flexibility would help and deliver that, and what would make it harder. So flexibility during the day will work, provided a service doesn't need to be available to its customers 9 to 5, say IT or customer support, where actually the hours need to be prescribed. So look at the services and think genuinely what kind of flexibility could we offer, what's our framework, and at their point there is, what's your framework for the future? Because as we've said, it's not likely there's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. There are people who would love to just work from home all the time, and others who would hate that and want to be in the office all the time. So how can you create a framework that kind of builds choice for people? Because that's going to be the best way to engage people with this, if they feel they have that element of choice and control and say and what it looks like. And lastly, that integration into core HR processes is really key at this point in time. How's your performance management system kind of taken into account this period, and how the other things people have had going on, and how objectives have had to change? Has recruitment changed? Acknowledge that you're doing a lot of flexible working, that's the way it's going to be in future. I know you're messaging that in recruitment and so on. So there are stories out there about organisations who've gone on a journey with flexible working. Many of these are pre-COVID. We're building our stories and learning about what organisations are planning now for the future. And we've shared a bit of that anecdotally during this call, but things that work well, equipping managers with some sort of flexible hiring role design guidance and toolkit for managers, so really helping managers understand the ways people can work flexibly and how to find the win-win with the job and the individual. Then we strongly recommend providing managers with that kind of upskilling and advice, looking at performance management and objective setting, and make sure flexible working conversations are just integrated and start to become regular conversations as part of one-to-one discussions. But yeah, building it into team meetings, just making it a much more explicit and regularly held conversation, recognizing that this will no longer be just for a small minority of people who are requesting it, but this will be the way that your organization operates. I've also got a couple of stories in here from smaller organisations who've been on a journey. Wessex Institute, I think I saw somebody from there on the attendee list. So been on a journey over the past year or so, understood that though they were doing a lot of flexible working already, there was a really high demand from staff for more access to flexible working. So got the leadership team on board and agreed what that could look like and what the vision was. We ran workshops with managers, getting them to understand those job design questions and the conversations they should be having with their team, and getting them on board with what we wanted to achieve. Lots of storytelling and case studies and examples of people who were already doing it, talking about it, making it public, making it people see that it was the way we operate around here. And you see there in the stats the impact that had in quite a short space of time. Now only 2% senior management as a barrier to flex, when at the start of the project it was 59%, and 91% of staff knowing what's expected of them. So, well ahead of COVID, Wessex Institute have been very proactive in creating that sort of culture. The mix I've put in here are a 4-day week organisation, and we often get asked about 4-day week organisations and, what's our view. And I think, I applaud any organisation trying to get its work done in less time, but I think what we can really learn from places like the Mix and others is how they've looked at what they do and how to be really productive. So when the Mix moved from 5 days to 4 days, they looked at how they were spending their time and identified activities that were just wasting time and resource, duplication or bureaucracy or whatever, and stripped all of that out. And that's what's made them operate on a 4-day week. But they do keep an eye on their emails on Friday. They do take urgent calls because we are a 5-day week world, sadly. But as I said, and I think other organisations who've looked at 4-day week have decided it is almost a bit too inflexible by choosing a day no one works. Actually, it's flexibility across the working week that many organisations want more of, and many employees want more of. But as I said, great learning if you read some of those stories to understand how they achieved it, delivering the same or often higher outputs in a smaller space of time. So I think that's enough of me and Emma talking for the time being. We wanted very much to hear some of your thoughts, questions, as you start to talk about this with your staff. What sort of challenges, questions are coming up, and what have we shifted by way of the world of flexible working, and what challenges remain to overcome. So we'll open up now. So you can ask a question either via the chat or the Q&A function, or if you'd like to use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, we can actually unmute you and you can have a chat to us. So whichever format works for you, but we'd love to hear your views on what's going on in your organisation on this right now. Just gone quiet.
I'd like to ask, for those of you who might be interested, we have one question coming in, but I'd also like to sort of ask any of you if you pre-COVID had any guidance for your managers as to how to proactively talk to teams about flexible working. I'm just interested, we're interested in that perspective, because we did some research with the CMI last year and we found out that only about 1 in 5 managers had ever proactively raised the conversation about ways of working, and are you working in the way that suits how you want or need to work in terms of flexible working? So we have a couple of questions coming in, but if anybody has any thoughts or views on that, were your managers having these conversations pre-COVID, I'd really like to hear that as well. So in terms of questions, I'll start. So Barry's asked a question: how do we engage the wider workforce in the conversation about flex working, particularly in an industry with a culture that seems fixed on its views? So flexible working will massively vary industry to industry, particularly if you're frontline versus you have the ability to work flexibly by being able to work remotely. And we know from a lot of our work across lots of different industries that there are different cultures and attitudes to flexible working. They vary hugely. In terms of engaging the wider workforce and in terms of trying to drive people to think differently, one of the best things we would always encourage is to tell stories about what currently happens in your organisation. So the reason we do our Power 50 Awards every year is we've always said that one of the things that's hardest to shift is that sort of assumption or stigma that if you are working less or working differently, you are not perceived to be able to have the same contribution or value for your organisation. And one of the best ways to challenge that assumption is to show people in very senior roles who are actually working less than full-time. So part-time being the hardest sort of area. So I would say a really good place to start would be to try and look into your organisation and into your industry and find examples of people who are currently doing this, ideally in more senior roles, and tell those stories. Because just the sort of sense of role modelling and that sense of it is possible, and the art of the possible should be much easier to come by now, we would hope, than it was before, is a really good place to start. Obviously you can provide all the kind of data and research that we've got on why this makes sense, but seeing people and seeing competitors and finding competitors if you are trying to influence your organisation to work differently who are doing this would be something I would definitely advocate.
Okay, I'm going to pick up, because Barry's clarified there that he works in policing, and actually we've also had a question around NHS, where again we've got obviously shift work going on. So just to say, yeah, a little bit of the learning from our work, particularly in the NHS. We haven't worked directly in policing, or I haven't, but I think there's some learning that reads across in terms of shift working. So yeah, the model we tested, I touched a little bit on this on the team slide. The model we tested in the NHS has been sort of a team-based approach to rostering, and the reasons we did that, we believe that what helps people feel that they're getting greater work-life balance, that they're getting control over their work, is that they can input to the schedule. They're getting plenty of notice. And week to week their work pattern has some predictability, and we know those three factors help someone feel that they're achieving greater work-life balance and have greater sense of control over their work and their shifts. So we tested a team-based approach to rostering, and we know others in the NHS have been testing self-rostering, and there's some parallels and some learning there as well, and we do believe that that has a genuine opportunity to help people to become more conscious of each other's working preferences and work-life patterns, and for individuals to feel that they're getting greater input and say into their schedule. So I think, yeah, there's two things in probably both the NHS and probably the police. There's one is the culture piece, and starting to normalise it by having conversations with everyone. So the great thing with the self-rostering and the team rostering is everybody can input whatever their reason for asking for flexible working it is. It isn't just the mums with young children who get to talk about flexible working. Everyone gets to talk about it, and we become much more reason neutral about why it matters. So there's that cultural shift in terms of normalising it, making it a conversation for everyone. And then there's trying things like self-rostering, team rostering, which allow people to have that greater input to the schedule. So that's my answer. Anything you want to add, Emma?
No, just to say we've had another question come in, and which was asking about the work we've done in the NHS on rostering. And just to say, if you go onto our website, because I think the question was asking, is there evidence to show the impact that it had? We've got a number of reports on our website under our research section and our recent work that highlight the work we did in the NHS. in relation to team-based rostering and the impact that it had. And we worked in a couple of wards in a number of different trusts, and we measured the impact that nurses felt they had in terms of both input into schedule, advance notice and predictability, which are the sort of axes we talk about in the context of shift-based working, and scores went up across all levels. And clearly what that suggests and what that tells us, and the feedback we had, is that goes a long way towards hopefully helping them to feel like they want to stay in the profession, because fundamentally what we're trying to do is to move to, and particularly frontline roles, an environment where people feel they're able to stay, they're able to feel that they have that control, and that ultimately we help organisations to retain high quality, important staff, particularly coming out of this crisis, and to attract, once they've managed to retain them through this, to be able to attract more staff in the future. So there's a lot of information. Please do refer to it on our website. I've had a few other kind of questions about stats and statistics. There's loads of data on our website, so if you haven't already, please do check that out. Had another question here from Lynn, or a question here from Lynn. More in our team want or need flex working while COVID restrictions continue, but we're worried about ways to encourage all team discussions, brainstorming, etc., when there is a blend of office-based and remote participation. Will virtual meetings be the best way to achieve this? It's a really good question, because we're all sort of juggling that kind of hinterland at the moment between how we were working and how we are going to want to go forwards. Clients that we're working with are trying lots of different things right now. There isn't one definitive answer. What we're hearing is those that are concerned about making sure that they can be as inclusive as possible are retaining virtual meetings. So where they have a blended approach, some people in the office and some people still at home, they're continuing to work flexible. They're continuing to provide that kind of remote team-based facilitation in terms of Zoom and any other sort of platforms. But Claire, I don't know. I was going to say the same. I think people are, yes, I think we need to retain Zoom working, unfortunately, to stop people feeling excluded. So I know tech-wise, lots of companies are making sure individual laptops back in the office have cameras, headsets, and so on, so that you can still participate in Zoom. And I think we are all learning, as we have today, that there's different ways to use this tech as well. So use the voting, use small talk, use breakout rooms and so on. And we'll be, so using the breakout and having a breakout for people in the office, breakout for people who are working remotely is a great way of kind of encouraging smaller group chat and participation. So, but I think it's important that we do continue to include people and unfortunately Zoom and Microsoft Teams and so on are a way of life for the time being, to make sure that, we're not creating a sort of two-tier structure with people in the office and people who aren't. Just a couple of admin points. So sending around a recording, we have recorded it, so we are happy to share it with anyone who wants to. So please just mail the info@timewise.co.uk address, and we are happy to make a copy of the recording available for people who weren't able to attend, or if you'd like to watch it again. And the slide about the survey statistics, Zach, I think that one was Hoxby, but we did definitely on the slide have the attributations for the survey. So if you want to mail me the one that you'd like, I can happily dig out the research. There have been a lot of studies published. We're keeping tabs on all of them to look at the impact that this period has had on flexible working. So by all means, ping me the one you're interested in and I can mail you the link. Lovely. I think that's probably all we've got time for in terms of questions. If anyone has any other, hopefully we've managed to answer some of them, if not all, but if you do have any other outstanding questions for us, please do pop them in the chat box while we've got the last sort of 5 minutes left, or as Claire said, email us directly. We're really, really happy to try and see if we can support in any way. Hopefully a lot of them will also be answered by the information in our guide as well, which you will be getting in the next couple of days.
So just by way then of kind of finishing off and mentioning some of that further support that we've touched on there. So we have created 2 guides. So one for managers, which as I say includes that kind of some suggestions for conversations that managers and individuals could have. It's got more on those different types of flexibility and to help managers understand the range of flexible working options, and a template with a few questions and triggers for a team discussion on flexible working. So we hope that's some really practical tools that you can kind of take and use. We've got a sort of parallel guide for individuals to help drive better conversations about flexible working between them and their manager. So it just helps an individual have thought in advance about the way they'd like to work flexibly, what that could look like with their role, and kind of go to a conversation with a manager much more having thoughtful about how it could fit and support their needs of their role. So that guide is also available. We won't be sending that one out automatically after this, but if you'd like it, please, again, mail the info at Timewise, or I think you can download it from our website, so please do that. Those pioneer programs, so the work in some of those sectors where we know flex can be hard, like retail, nursing, more recently asset management and construction, you find those on our website as well. And if you sign up for our emails, then you'll get updates as those projects continue. And there's plenty more out there for how you produce the business case. We're obviously running lots of webinars and training and support, both for HR teams and line managers at the moment on this topic. So if you're interested, we'd love to come and chat to your leadership team or your managers through our consultancy team. So give us a shout if that's something that would be valuable in your organisation. And last plug, if you are an organisation that is hiring flexibly and you'd like to shout about it and make sure you reach some great candidates, then our Timewise job site is worth a chat as well. These links are the ones that are in the guide. They're the ones we used earlier, but yes, the full sites for these is in our guide. And again, we're retweeting, sharing via LinkedIn and stuff, articles that we find really interesting and useful to learn about this time, the impact that's having on staff, and what hopes and kind of expectations they have for the future of work. So yeah, keep following us, and we'll keep mailing that sort of thing because we love reading it. So yeah, I hope that we've given you a bit of insight and advice to embrace flexible working. We've shared a bit of our learning here, but we're going to share tools with you after this that I hope you will take and find useful. And we've talked a little bit about some of the pitfalls and a few stories of what other organisations are doing right now. So really hope you find that useful. We'll be sending out both a guide and a short survey at the end of this to ask for a little bit of feedback, because it's always useful to know, are we talking to the things that you would find useful? Is there anything we're missing out? So yeah, it'd be great if you could fill in the feedback form. Emma, any final words?
Just say thank you for staying with us. I hope you found it useful. Please, as Claire said, do get in touch if you want a conversation about how we can support you directly with the work that you're doing in the short term to support your teams back into the office, or further down the line in terms of a long-term, more strategic approach. And good luck. It's challenging, it's exhausting, but the fact that you're here, we're really pleased. That shows that you're really leaning into a conversation about flexible working, and we hope you'll get some benefit from it. Thanks very much.